Venezuela is still reeling from the shock of yesterday's U.S. strikes, which captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife and sent them to New York to stand trial on drug charges. Footage shows residential areas and an airbase in Caracas hit during the operation, codenamed Absolute Resolve. Venezuela has since declared a national emergency, denouncing what it calls the extremely serious military aggression. The country's Supreme Court has ordered Vice President Delcy Rodriguez to take on the role of president for now. U.S. President Donald Trump says Washington will, quote, run Venezuela until a safe, proper and judicious transition is possible. He says Washington plans to repair Venezuela's damaged oil infrastructure and, quote, get the oil flowing.
We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
Nicolas Maduro is now being held in a New York jail and faces drugs and weapons charges. President Trump has accused him of leading a drug cartel. Mr. Maduro has denied those allegations and says the U.S. is using its war on drugs as an excuse to depose him and get its hands on Venezuela's vast oil reserves. Nick Harper is covering this story for CNN, and he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Nick, thank you for joining us. What more do we know about President Maduro's detention, and what steps are expected next?
Well, Kut-Ping, he's currently being held in Brooklyn at a detention facility with heavily armed guard outside of that building. It is likely that he will make his first court appearance on Monday at some point, potentially towards the end of the day at New York time. That will be a heavily coordinated operation to take him from the facility in Brooklyn across the bridges onto the island of Manhattan, where he will make his initial appearance for the arraignment to face those charges. The New York Attorney General filed new charges, including narco-terrorism, against him on Saturday, and she said that he would be facing the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. We know that behind the scenes, lawyers, high-profile ones, are angling for business. They are trying to get Nicolas Maduro as their client to defend him against the US government. But the US government at this stage is very much trying to send a message around the world that it is in control. We've seen those pictures and videos of Nicolas Maduro blindfolded, handcuffed on the military naval shift, also being walked through the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration building where he was initially held. The US is saying that they now have him, he is in custody, and they determined to prosecute him in US courts as quickly as possible.
Now, Nick, President Trump says the US will run Venezuela for now. How will that play out?
Yeah, it's very difficult to know. I mean, so many questions have been thrown up by that stunning assertion that the US is going to run Venezuela. The US president says there will be a group. He'll designate them. It might be made up of his Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary. They may be part of that team. But they may also be working with the person who's been sworn in Venezuela, the former Vice President Delcy Rodriguez. The US somehow suggesting that they want to mold her to make her the type of leader that the US wants. But how that will play out is still unclear. But the US is warning that if those demands are not met, the US military is standing by off the coast of Venezuela. The US president suggesting there could even be a second, much larger strike if demands are not met. And of course, at the bottom of all of this are oil interests in the country, oil interests that the US says it now intends to seize, to extract, and then sell around the world. The US seeing this very much as a business opportunity, and that amidst that international condemnation that we're seeing, that the US, according to other countries, has violated international law, that it's broken the UN Charter. And we know that there will be that emergency meeting at the UN Security Council first thing Monday morning, at which we will see plenty of countries around that horseshoe table pushing back against the United States and telling them that they've broken the law and that they should not have carried out this operation to seize Nicolas Maduro.
Well, many thanks for that update. Nick Harper there, reporting live from Washington, D.C. The U.S. operation has drawn mixed reactions from the international community, from outright condemnation to more muted concern and caution. China says it strongly condemns the U.S. strikes, saying it threatens peace in Latin America and the Caribbean. Beijing also calling for the immediate release of President Maduro. North Korea also chiming in, denouncing the strikes as a serious form of encroachment of sovereignty. Japan's foreign ministry has reiterated its position as a G7 country, offering support toward the restoration of democracy and stabilization of the situation in Venezuela. Malaysia said it opposed all foreign intervention in the internal affairs of other states. Russia has condemned America's armed aggression, saying that ideological hostility has prevailed. Venezuela's neighbor, Colombia, expressed deep concern, mobilizing its armed forces to secure the border. Brazil also condemning the U.S. actions for crossing a, quote, unacceptable line. President Lula da Silva says they represent a grave affront to Venezuela's sovereignty. A spokesperson for UN Chief Antonio Guterres called the U.S. action a dangerous precedent and underscored the importance of respecting international law. Meanwhile, some of Washington's allies have welcomed the capture of Mr. Maduro, but expressed concern over the upholding of international law. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer says his government regards Mr. Maduro as an illegitimate president and will shed no tears for the end of his regime. He also denied that the UK played a role in the strikes. French President Emmanuel Macron also lauding the end of Mr. Maduro's regime, calling for a peaceful and democratic transition of power. But his foreign minister said the US operation undermined international law. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Mr. Maduro led the country into ruin, but he noted the legal aspects of the raid are complex and principles of international law must apply. Singapore is gravely concerned by the U.S. intervention in Venezuela. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says Singapore is deeply committed to international law, and this includes the principles of the UN Charter that safeguard the independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of all states, especially small ones. MFA says Singapore has consistently opposed actions that are contrary to international law by any parties, including foreign military intervention in any country. Singapore also urges all parties to exercise restraint and hopes for a peaceful resolution to the situation in Venezuela in accordance with international law and the principles of the UN Charter. MFA says no Singaporeans have e-registered with the ministry in Venezuela, and Singaporeans are advised to defer all travel to the country.